Prime Minister Gyula Horn when he was still foreign minister, and I drove him through the city of Vienna when we planned together, Vienna and Budapest, a joint, and you know that as well, a joint enterprise World Fair, when still the Iron Curtain was existing. I must say, the courage of people like Laszlo Kovacs and others I mentioned, to transform the country from communism into a social, economic, modern democracy cannot be compared to the courage of Mr. Horn to draw the clock back and to undermine democracy and the social stability of the country. What kind of differences, what kind of difference in the personalities, in the attitude of people like Gyula Horn, Laszlo Kovacs, Vilmos Saba and others, on the one hand, and on the other hand, of Mr. Orban and your president of the National Parliament and other colleagues, what kind of difference? And the attack is not in Hungary led against the people like Orban, but the attack is led by Orban against people like Laszlo Kovacs and others. And this makes very clear how the transformation of society has come to a stop in the wrong way and has been turned around. András Inotai, in a much more sophisticated and, of course, very well profound analysis today, spoke about transition. For me, the transition in Europe after the Second World War in the Western part was a transition from poverty and recession towards economic welfare parallel to, and social welfare parallel to economic growth. And we all hoped, and I know the article, the first article which were published at that time when the transition started by Mr. Inotai, we all hoped that this will be not copied, but will go parallel also in the Central and Eastern European part. Build up economic growth, and parallel to economic growth, social welfare, and build up modern democracy. And what we see today is in both parts of our societies, we have a transition backwards in many, many countries. Economically and socially, we have less economic growth and less income equality, we have rising inequality, and we have different kind of tendencies to undermine and reduce democracy, to undermine and reduce fundamental rights, to undermine and reduce the respect for minorities. Also, this was the aim of the European Union. The aim of the European Union, the founding fathers, there were more fathers at that time than today, but Sita and I support their fight for mothers in Europe, for the political mothers and economic mothers, if we think about the recent proposal also for the economic enterprises. We see this turning back from the original idea what Europe is about. Therefore, I'm always very cautious if we have the title like here, Democracy, Freedom, Liberty in Central and Eastern Europe. Of course, we deal now with Central and Eastern Europe, but that does not mean we have dangers for democracy and freedom and liberty only in Central and Eastern Europe, because we have them also in the Western part and different other parts of Europe. I think Greece has all been mentioned. I was there 4 times this year already to look in the situation, and it's getting worse and worse. If we think about the different right-wing extremist groups and how migrants are treated and many other issues, there is a danger everywhere. But that doesn't mean because of danger everywhere we shouldn't care about the dangers in Central and Eastern Europe, but we should at the same time think about and know that the dangers also in the other countries. Secondly, the economic crisis and the crisis of democracy is well connected. Of course, it's not a total parallelity. But if we don't fight sufficiently and successfully against the economic crisis, we cannot fight against the tendency to reduce democracy. Because I said, and Attila Mester has made it very clear about the situation of poverty, rising poverty. Isn't it unbelievable that in Europe, with the wealth we still have today, we just accept rising poverty. And isn't it catastrophic that, and Sergei knows it perfectly well, that we had difficulties to get the fight against poverty into the EU 2020 aims. Can you imagine? We have social ministers in Europe who said, no, fight against poverty is now not a European subject. It is not only a European subject, I agree, but it's a subject for us all, especially for social democrats. And we needed, unfortunately, I have to say, we needed President Barroso, who is not a left-winger. He was a Maoist, but now he moved far away from being Maoist. So I don't know what Mr. Orban would say about him. Perhaps he's so critical of Barroso because Barroso has been a Maoist. But if we had to have him as an ally to get through that the fight against poverty is a European aim. And therefore I think it is absolutely important to continue that fight we started on many levels together with Sergei and of course all our national parties. Let me say only one word on democracy and democracy in Hungary. The problem in fighting against these tendencies of reducing democracy is because there are so many fights to fight. You look to one legislative proposal and you speak about it and you notice that 3 other proposals have been on the table already. You go to the next proposal and then you see that the amendment in the parliament, in the Hungarian parliament, the night before the vote has been introduced, which is totally changing against the attitude. This is a trick, a permanent trick, unfortunately, here in Hungary to undermine democracy. Now the Hungarian right wing says, we are democratic elect. Yes, they are democratic elect. I don't speak, it was only a minority. If you look to the citizen, okay, that's life. But does it mean you can do whatever you want if you have a 2/3 majority? Attila Mesterházy already showed that it made it clear it does not mean. Because democracy is not only a formal thing, democracy is something of substance. Even if you have a strong majority in the parliament, more than 2/3 majority in spite of you having only a minority in the citizens who voted for you, you are not allowed to do everything in order to maintain yourself in power more or less with the aim forever, or at least for any long time. You're not allowed to disrespect minorities. You're not allowed to disrespect the parliament, because the parliament gets a machine, a voting machine for the government. This is not the purpose of parliaments. The purpose of parliaments is to discuss issues, to make it possible, including the minorities, including the opposition, to change proposals coming in from the government. Including, of course, if you have the trick that, okay, they come from the parliament because you put individual parliamentarians to put the legislative proposals or the amendments in order to prevent even parliament working. Isn't it a special trick that, for example, in Hungary, you use the parliament and individual parliamentarians to overcome normal parliamentary procedures? And therefore, I think these things are not acceptable. Secondly, on the law now for the election law which is proposed. Again, already was discussion the question of registration. In America, Obama and the Democrats and many other people fight to get rid of that form of registration because already it has been proven that registration is very selective against poorer people or against people who are less mobile and so on. So why go from a functioning system to a non-functioning system? Or let's say, why go from an inclusive system of voting and legislative election to a potentially exclusive system, especially now if you have even deleted the email possibilities of registering. So I think it is absolutely clear that what is the purpose of such activities. NGOs, and just a meeting also again with some representative NGOs, are more prevented to be active, politically active, not as parties, and internet, because in future it should be not allowed to have internet as a political platform for political activities. Again, this is something which is very dubious. I know that Mr. Orban is a friend of China and Chinese money. I didn't know that he's a friend of Chinese methods to control the internet. So I think, again, we should be very clear. These are not individually, every of these activities you can say, why not? If you put it together, it is endangering democracy. And therefore, I think we should be very clear on these things. The fifth point, we should see the whole picture, as I said, the whole picture in Hungary, but of course the whole picture in Europe. Because what I said about Hungary now, you can, in some deviations, speak also about other countries. There are political forces to change the structure of society. To change the structure of society in the sense of the argument, we have too much social welfare. This is endangering our competitive position. We have to reduce it. We have to reduce the power of trade unions and other political groups who are endangering, again, the competitivity. And therefore, we have to change the social welfare. They start in Athens with the Troika. They started in Portugal, do it now in Cyprus. And my master visit to Athens 2 weeks ago said the Troika is a destroika because it's destroying social structures and social elements of our society. And this is now leading to two elements of lack of democratic development. The first, I said, like the Golden Dawn in Greece or other movements, or movements when the people say, you know, the poorer you are or the more you see a danger for your job, you are more nationalistic and you find somebody must be the enemy. Who is the enemy? Who is responsible for my situation? And very often it's not the government, it's the Roma, it's the migrants, it's another kind of minority. And therefore this is one of the dangers. And the second danger is, of course, that the nationalism is also growing in the political field. And what we see, especially in Hungary, this kind of economic, let's say, patriotism. You know, we have to defend our country against IMF and finally perhaps even the Jewish capital coming from the outside and putting pressure on us. You see it in several countries. This kind of economic patriotism finally leads to economic, let's say, inclusion or activities which says only us, only our companies, only our farmers can be good farmers, and this from the outside have to be prevented. This kind of economic protectionism, which is always dangerous for economic development, because we see those countries who are more protectionistic in their way, they have less economic success. And therefore, I think we have to be very clear that democratic development is closely connected with economic development. And when I met, we had the discussion with Madame Merkel 2 or 3 weeks ago in the European Parliament, and Madame Merkel said, "Isn't it wonderful what we reached, the freedom in Eastern Europe?" And then I only can say, in line with what Attila Esterházy and Sergei Stanishev said, the freedom of the unemployed, the freedom of the poor, it's wonderful. He's free of a job, so he doesn't have to get up in the morning to get to the job. So very freedom. Our conception of freedom is a freedom, also a freedom of want, a freedom of needs, a freedom of poverty, a freedom of, to have the choice between a job. And in some of the countries, they're free. The Portuguese young people are free to go to Mozambique or to Angola to get a job. But this is another kind of freedom what we expect. Yes, we are for migration and freedom of migration, but we are against the force to have to migrate to get a job. We're against the force to have to migrate in order to live in a free country where you can develop your capacities, you can develop your creativity. And therefore this trend that young people, even from Hungary, say it's better to go out and even say, I don't like to come back, perhaps, because I don't see, at least for the moment, any incentive to come back. I think that is very dangerous for our development. And the last point, but one, what I particularly deplore is that many are, especially on the right side, they say Europe, we are for Europe. Or as it was saying at the EPP conference in Bucharest, there was a big title, More Europe. And then even the Polish Prime Minister said, yes, more Europe means less money for Europe. And this kind of nationalistic tendencies is growing again and again. That only, is a competition for the moment, who pays less for the European budget? Or who wants to cut more in the European budget? Which means, of course, cutting for countries like Hungary or Bulgaria or other countries who need the money because they don't have own money for doing the minimum of work, of research, of elaboration and growth in some of the region. So the nationalism which is at home, used by Orban and others is falling back. Because finally, not only Mr. Orban is nationalistic, maybe also Germany and other countries, the net payers are more and more nationalistic, including in my own country when recently said we have to veto the European budget, as if we are, the biggest power who just start with a veto. You start with negotiations first. So this kind of tendency is very dangerous, and it reflects in the image of the European Union. In all the countries, the image of the European Union is going back. No, it's not about image, but it's about the readiness to work on this common Europe. Therefore, what is about democracy, freedom, and liberty is something which is endangering also Europe as the means to be competitive or to defend our common interests worldwide. Because it's not about, China inviting to give some money to Hungary, China inviting to buy some port in Piraeus or somewhere else. It's about how we can be competitive in a global competition, but we cannot be competitive if we do protectionist policies, if we do nationalist policy, only if we can have a common European Union. And to the last point, Massimo mentioned this question of what we do with this relationship, with this situation that democracy is the wrong way. Now I know from my own country, when we had the situation, it is very ambiguous and ambivalent if you come from the outside and say, you're doing wrong, you have to change that, and we don't accept that. Therefore, I think the main emphasis must be on the civil society, on the political structures and political parties in Hungary itself. This event, I think, is also showing the solidarity, as Sergei said, not only with Attila Mesterházy, but with all Hungarians, irrespective of political party, who say, we are not ready to accept what is happening here. And I would invite again that also other political groups would do the same. I know that there are many people, even in the European People's Party, who are not happy about the development. But they should have the courage to say it and to come here and say, Mr. Orban, don't do that. You are damaging the image also of the whole right-wing and Christian democratic movement in Europe. It's not enough not to have him again as vice president of the European People's Party, which is, okay, it's some sign. Otherwise, he would be, running and demonstrating again how good he is and how involved he is. But this is, therefore, beyond the legal question. For me, it is a political question. We as Social Democrats, Sergei made it clear, and we as a Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament, we will always show the solidarity, not only with the socialists here in this country, but solidarity with the citizens. That means solidarity with the country. But the country for us is not Mr. Orban, he's representing the government. Yes, okay, we accept that. But the country are all those citizens who suffer from this government, who want to have a change, a democratic change, but a change, and who are fighting for democracy. And again, it was courageous for people like Laszlo. It is courageous for many citizens in this country who don't know who is tapping their telephone, who don't know who is watching their behavior, who don't know who will see who is registering for the election and who is not. They are all much more courageous than we, but at least the minimum we can show from the European side to be on their side and to show their solidarity. And that is the purpose of this meeting today. Thank you very much.